throne room door slammed open. Boots crossed the marble in 3 strides. A woman in a gray cloak walked past 40 armed guards without slowing even once. She did not bow. She did not stop at the painted line where commoners were meant to kneel. She kept walking until she stood at the lowest step of the dais. In her arms she carried a bundle wrapped in a faded pack shawl, and the bundle was breathing. The Alpha King rose from his seat without meaning to. He knew her instantly. Rowan Vale, banished 5 years ago for a murder she did not commit. The council froze. She lifted her chin so the lamplight caught her face. She leaned forward and spoke 4 soft words to the king. What did she whisper that broke the strongest lichen pack on the continent in one night? Stay with me on this one. 5 years before that throne hall, Rowan Vale was scrubbing flagstones in the kitchen wing of the same palace. She was 18. Her hands were red. The high windows above her threw long bars of light across the floor, and she scrubbed inside the light because the head cook said the stones cooled faster there. Omegas worked the kitchens. Omegas did not eat at the long table. Omegas slept in the lower hall and stood when an alpha walked past. Rowan stood. She kept her eyes down. She had been told 100 times that an omega who looked an alpha in the eye was asking for a slap. That night the king came through the kitchen. He was looking for water. He had been training in the east yard for 6 hours, and his shirt was still dark with sweat. He did not see her at first. He walked to the basin, lifted the dipper and drank. Then he turned to leave. Then he stopped. He looked at her. She was on her knees, sleeves pushed back, hair tied in a wet knot. He said, "Stand." She stood. He said, "Look at me." She did not look at him. He said, "Look at me, Omega." She looked. His eyes were the color of cold iron. He studied her for the length of 2 breaths. He gave her a short nod, the kind a soldier gives a soldier, and walked out. She did not scrub again that night. She sat on the wet stones and tried to make her hands stop shaking. That nod was the first thing. The second thing was a folded note tucked under a basket of bread the next morning. Meet me at the west stair after second bell. She did not go. The third thing was him standing in the doorway of the kitchen at second bell the night after, waiting. He did not say anything. He did not need to. She went up the west stair. For 3 months they met like that. Always at second bell. Always in the small library on the north tower, behind the stack of old hunting manuals nobody read. He talked. She listened. Then she talked and he listened like nobody had ever listened to her in her life. He told her about his older half-brother, Lord Tarek, who held the regency while the king was in the field. He told her Tarek made his teeth ache in a way he could not name. He told her he was supposed to take a noble mate by the end of the season, and he could not stomach the thought. The first night he brought her bread from the long table, the soft white bread she had only ever seen carried out on platters. He set it on the floor between them like an offering. She broke it in half and gave him the larger piece, because that was what an omega did, and he took the smaller piece back out of his own hand and pressed the larger one into hers and said, "Eat." She ate. He watched her eat. He did not look away. The second night he brought a wool blanket and laid it on the cold flagstones so she would not have to kneel. The third night he brought nothing. He said her name out loud for the first time, and the way he said it made her sit down on the blanket and put her hands over her face for a full minute. He waited. He did not ask why. He already knew. One night in late autumn, he closed the door behind him and the bolt slid home, and they did not leave the tower until dawn. In the morning, she walked back down the west stair, and she felt as if the whole palace was looking at her. Nobody was. The hallways were empty. The kitchen was warm. The head cook handed her a basin of carrots and told her to peel faster. Rowan peeled. 3 weeks later, the king rode north with 200 lichens to put down a border revolt. He had not told her he was leaving. There had been no time. He had been pulled out of bed by a runner at the third bell of the night, and he had pressed his forehead to hers once, and was gone before the sun touched the wall. She did not see him for 40 days. On the 41st day, she missed her bleed. On the 43rd day, Lord Tarek walked into the kitchen wing with 4 guards and a sealed parchment in his hand. He read the parchment out loud. The body of the king's youngest brother, Prince Aldrich, had been found at the bottom of the North Tower stair, his throat opened by a blade. A guard had seen an Omega, with red hands leaving the tower at first bell. The Omega's name was on the duty roster of the kitchen wing. The Omega's name was Rowan Vale. Rowan dropped the carrot she was holding. She said the only thing she could think of, which was that she had not done it. Tarek did not look at her when she said it. He folded the parchment back into his sleeve and told the guards to bring her to the trial hall. The trial took 1 day. The king was still in the north and could not be reached. Tarek presided. 3 witnesses said they had seen Rowan on the north stair. Rowan said she had been in the kitchen. The head cook was not called. No one was called for her. At dusk the court ruled. The Omega was branded on the back of the left shoulder with a small running wolf that meant traitor. She was given a gray cloak. She was walked to the south gate. The gate opened. She was walked through the gate. The gate closed behind her. The first winter she lived in a goatherd's hut 3 days' walk west of the wall. The goatherd was a half-blood named Myra who did not ask questions and did not care about brands. Rowan slept on a straw pallet. She helped with the goats. She kept her shoulder covered. She did not say her name out loud, and Myra did not ask for it. In the spring her belly was round, and Myra finally looked at her and said, "You are going to need more milk than I have." Rowan moved on. She moved further west, past the salt road, into the kind of country where the maps showed nothing but a small blue line for a river. She found a cabin somebody had walked away from. The roof was half down. She fixed the roof with a hatchet and a sack of nails she traded a silver pin for at a crossroads. The pin had been her mother's. She did not look back when she handed it over. The boy was born on a night when the river was loud with snowmelt. There was nobody there. She bit a strip of leather, and she did the thing herself, and when the baby was out she cut the cord with a knife she had sharpened that afternoon for exactly that purpose. She wrapped him in her pack shawl, the one with the faded blue thread that marked her old clan. She held him against her chest until he stopped crying. Then she lay back on the floor, and she watched the smoke from the stove curl against the dark beams. He had his father's eyes. She knew it before he opened them. She just knew. She named him Wren. For the next 3 years, she lived in the cabin and the boy grew. She taught him to walk on the river stones. She taught him to whistle. She taught him to keep his voice down when there were strangers on the road, because there were always strangers on the road by the 2nd year, hunters and trappers, and once a tax collector who took one look at her brand through her open collar and turned his horse around and rode the other way. The brand kept her safe in that strange way. The brand also kept her from going to town for a healer when Wren ran a fever at 18 months. She kept the fever down with cold cloths, and the boy lived because boys with that bloodline lived. That was a lesson she filed away. She did not stop thinking about the trial. She thought about the witnesses. 3 witnesses who had not been part of the kitchen and had no reason to be on the north stair. One of them had been wearing the pin of Tarek's house. She had seen it. She had not known what it meant at 18. She knew now. In the 4th year, a peddler came up the river with a pack horse and a load of pots, and at the bottom of one of the pots was a folded sheet of paper with the regent's seal on it. The peddler did not know what the paper said. He could not read. He had taken it for the metal of the seal. Rowan paid him 3 of the small coins she had been saving in a tin under the floorboard, and she carried the paper inside. The paper was a draft of an order. The order said that on the night Prince Aldrich had died, the North Tower had been emptied of all its guards by the regent's command. The signature at the bottom was Tarek's. There was a note in the margin in another hand, the hand of the captain of the regent's guard, asking whether the kitchen Omega had been moved into position yet. Rowan sat at the table for a long time after she read it. The boy was outside, throwing sticks for a half-grown dog that had wandered up to the cabin the year before. She could hear him laughing. She set the paper down. She picked it up. She set it down again. She thought about staying. She thought about burning the paper in the stove and never speaking of it again, raising the boy on the river, teaching him to fish and to whistle, and never to ask why his mother did not have a clan name. He would be safe in that life. He would be small in it. He would never carry a name that meant anything. She picked up the paper a third time, and she folded it into the inner lining of her cloak. Then she walked out to the boy and she said, "Ren, we are going to take a long walk." He said, "Where to?" She said, "Home." He had never seen home. He did not know what the word meant. But she packed 3 days of bread and the paper and his small wooden horse in the pack shawl, and she walked east. It took her 16 days to reach the city. She slept under hedges. She traded the last of her mother's silver for a wagon ride across the salt road. She kept the boy's hood up. On the evening of the 16th day, she stood on the high road above the city and looked down at the wall she had been pushed through 5 years before. That night she stayed at a small inn just outside the south gate. She told the innkeeper her name was Hare. She paid in coin. She took a room on the second floor that looked out over the road. She sat by the window with the boy asleep against her shoulder. She drank a cup of water slowly. Her hands had finally stopped shaking. The boy was warm. The pack shawl was folded across her lap. The paper with Tarek's signature was in the inner pocket of her cloak. The lamps in the city below were coming on one by one, and for the length of 1 cup of water, she let herself believe the worst part was over. Then someone knocked on the door. She did not move. The knock came again. 3 short raps. A pause. 2 short raps. That was a scout signal. An old one. Used by the king's road riders 5 years ago. Rowan set the cup down very carefully. She slid Ren onto the bed. She walked to the door without making a sound, and she said, through the wood, "State your business." A voice on the other side said, "You were not on the North Tower stair the night the prince died." "I was." "Open the door." Rowan did not open the door. She said, "Who are you?" The voice said, "My name is Hawk. I was a captain under the king. I was reassigned to the Salt Road the morning Tarek had you branded. I have been looking for you for 2 years. There are men in this town looking for you for a different reason. Open the door before they find you." She opened the door. The man in the hall was thin, gray at the temples, dressed in the brown of a road trader. He did not step into the room. He held up an open palm to show he had no blade in his sleeve. He said, "There is a side gate. The under gate at the granary. It opens onto the lower market. From the lower market, it is 2 streets to the throne hall. If you do not move in the next 10 minutes, 4 of Tarek's men will come up these stairs." Rowan said, "Why would I go to the throne hall?" Hawk said, "Because the king is in residence tonight. Because he is the only person in that city with the authority to lift your brand. And because the boy on that bed is the only person alive who can make him do it." Rowan looked at Ren. Ren had not woken up. She lifted him to her shoulder, and she wrapped the pack shawl around his back so his face was pressed against her neck. She said, "Walk." They walked. They went down the back stair, through the kitchen, out a side door into a narrow alley that smelled of onions. Hawk moved like a man who had done this before. Rowan moved like a woman who had no choice. The streets were cool and lit only by the lamps over each door. Twice Hawk stopped her with a hand and pulled her into the lee of a wall, and a patrol passed in the cross street, and Ren did not stir. The undergate was unlocked. Of course it was. Hawk had unlocked it the day before. They passed through. The granary smelled of dust and old grain. On the far side they came out into the lower market, and from the lower market they could see the lit windows of the throne hall a 1/4 mile up the slope. Hawk said, "I cannot walk in there with you. The moment I am in the hall, Tarek has me killed. You will walk in alone. The herald will challenge you. You will say the words I am about to give you, and he will let you pass. Are you listening? Rowan said, I am listening. Hawk said, you will say, I claim the right of an Omega to speak before her king without intermediary. It is an old right. Tarek has not bothered to repeal it. The herald will let you through. He stepped back. He said, when you stand in front of him, do not speak first. Let him see the boy. Let him see your face. Then you say what you came to say. Rowan said, and what if he does not believe me? Hawk said, he will believe you. I have known him since he was 12. He will believe you. She walked up the slope. The hall was lit from inside by oil lamps the size of barrels. 2 guards stood at the lower step. They did not stop her. She walked past them. They did not call after her. She climbed the wide stair. At the top, a herald in a red sash stepped in front of her with his hand on his sword and his mouth open. She said the words. He closed his mouth. He stepped aside. She walked through the open doors. The hall inside was 40 paces long. The court was in session late, because the king ran his court late when he was newly back from the field. 40 heads turned. The Alpha King stood at the dais. Lord Tarek stood 3 paces behind him on his right, wearing pale gray. The captain of the regent's guard stood at the rear of the dais. 40 armed guards lined the side walls. You already know what she did next. She walked past every one of them. She stopped 2 feet from the lowest step. The bundle in her arms was breathing. She lifted her chin so the lamplight caught her face, and she said, soft enough that only the front row could hear, I carry your son. The king did not move. The hall held its breath. The king said, just as soft, I know. I have known since the 3rd day. Welcome home. If you are still with me, hit that subscribe button. It tells me you want the rest of these. For the length of 1 heartbeat, the room did not understand what they had heard. Then Tarek understood. His face went still in the way a man's face goes still when his back foot has slipped on a cliff. He stepped forward and he said, Fast, your majesty. This is the branded Omega. This is the woman who killed Prince Aldrich. Her brand is on the records. The king did not look at him. The king said, I'm aware of the brand on her shoulder. I'm also aware of who put it there. Captain Val. Step forward. The captain of the regent's guard did not step forward. The king said, Captain Val. I gave you an order. The captain looked at Tarek. Tarek did not look back. The captain stepped forward. The king said, 5 years ago on the night my brother died you wrote a margin note on a parchment. The note asked whether the kitchen Omega had been moved into position. Do you remember writing that note? The captain's mouth opened. No sound came out. The king said, I will take that as yes. Drop your sword. The captain dropped his sword. It struck the marble with a flat ring. Tarek took half a step back. The other half he took toward the side door that led to the regent's wing. He did not make it. 2 of the king's personal guard had moved up behind him while the captain was being questioned, and they each took one of his arms. The king turned finally and looked at his brother. He said, You sent my brother to the North Tower that night. You sent the Omega up the same stair. You wrote the testimony of the 3 witnesses. You put the brand on the woman who carries my son. Do you have anything you would like to say? Tarek said, You cannot prove any of it. The king said, I can. The draft order with your seal on it has been in my desk drawer for 9 months. I was waiting for the right room to read it in. The hall went absolutely still. The king said, Half of this pack swore an oath to me. Half of you swore an oath to the regent, because you thought the regent was the safer bet. I have just told you which bet was safer. Choose now. Step left for the king. Step right for the regent. You have a count of 5. Nobody moved on 1. On 2, 3 of the older council members stepped left. On 3, the captain of the city guard stepped left, and the 4 men who had been standing closest to him followed. On 4, the herald who had let Rowan into the hall stepped left. On 5, the room had moved. 27 of the 40 had stepped left. 8 had stepped right. 5 had not moved at all. The king said, "The 5 who did not move will be questioned. The 8 who stepped right will be questioned harder. The 27 who stepped left will hold their posts. The pack will hold." One of the older council members, a gray-bearded chapter elder named Ren Holt, took one step further forward than the rest and said, "Your Majesty, I voted for the brand 5 years ago. I voted on the testimony I was given. If the testimony was false, the vote was false. I will say so in front of every chapter that sends a herald to my door." The other older members nodded once, hard, and the captain of the city guard nodded with them, and a low ripple of the same word, "witnessed," moved through the left side of the room. It was not a chant. It was the older form of an oath, the one the chapter elders used when a thing needed to be said only once. Then he looked at Rowan. He said, "Come up." She walked up the 5 low steps. She did not let the boy down. She stopped one pace from the king. He looked at the boy. The boy was awake now and looking at the king with the gravity of a 4-year-old who has been told to behave indoors. The boy had the king's eyes. The king reached out and he put his open hand on the back of the boy's head. His hand covered the whole of the small skull. He said, "What is his name?" Rowan said, "Ren." The king said, "Ren Voss." The boy said, in the small clear voice of a child who has been awake for 10 seconds, "Hi." The king almost smiled. He did not let himself. He looked over the boy's head at Rowan and he said, "Lo, I should have come for you." "I am sorry." Tarek, held between 2 guards, spoke then. He said, "Fast, Your Majesty. The Omega is still branded. The brand is law. You cannot acknowledge the child until the brand is lifted, and the brand cannot be lifted without a full council vote, and the council is now 12 short. The boy is not legitimate." The king turned his head an inch. He said, "I do not lift the brand." Running wolf above it. He tore the page out cleanly. He held it over the nearest oil lamp until it caught. He dropped the burning page on the marble. He looked at Tarek across the small fire. He said, "There is no brand. There is no traitor. There is a woman who walked back into the hall I should never have let her be pushed out of. The boy is mine. He is named. He is heir." The pack at his back said, almost in one voice, "Heir." The word ran through the hall like a low bell. The rest of the night were stripped of rank and put on the slow road north under guard, which was a softer sentence than they had earned. The king did not leave the hall until the writing was done. He sat at the long table off the side of the dais. He signed orders. He signed the legitimization of the heir. He signed an order restoring Rowan's clan name and adding the king's own name to it, which was the older form of a marriage notice, and the high steward read the wording and looked up and the king said, "Yes." "That one. Sign it as witnessed." The steward signed. Rowan sat across from him with the boy on her lap. The boy had fallen asleep again with his thumb in his mouth. She did not say much. She watched the king's hand move across the page. The hand was the same hand that had drunk from the dipper in the kitchen 7 years ago. It was scarred more now. It was steadier. At some point a maid brought tea. Rowan held the cup without drinking from it. The maid stood for a long moment at the side of the table and finally said, "My lady, would you like a hot bath drawn for you and the young lord?" Rowan had not been called my lady in her life. She nodded slowly. The maid curtsied and left. The king looked up. He said, "My lady." Rowan said, "I will get used to it." He said, "Take your time." When the writing was done, it was past second bell. The hall had emptied. The oil lamps had been turned low. Carefully, the way a man holds something he has been told for the first time he is allowed to hold. He looked down at the small face. His mouth moved once. He did not say anything that anyone could hear. Rowan said, "I had a question." "For 5 years." He looked up. She said, "Did you know?" "While I was in the kitchen. Before any of this. Did you know what I was to you? Did you mean any of it?" The king said, "I meant all of it. I came back from the north on the 42nd day, and I went to the kitchen wing first. The cook told me what had happened. I have spent 5 years finding the proof you brought tonight. I would have spent 5 more. Rowan said, "You should have come for me." The king said, "I know." She did not say it was all right. It was not. But she set her hand on his wrist, where the cuff of his shirt met the scar from a war she had not been there for, and she left it there. They did not say anything else for a while. A door at the far end of the hall opened, not slammed, and a single guard came in with his eyes carefully on the floor, and he said, "Your Majesty, the room is ready." The king said, "Thank you." He carried the boy. Rowan walked beside him. They went out of the hall and up the wide stair, and down the long corridor on the second floor that led to the king's private rooms. The corridor was lit by a single lamp at each end. The boy did not wake. The pack shawl had slid down off the boy's back, and Rowan adjusted it without thinking, and the king watched her hand and did not say anything. At the door the king paused. He looked at her. He said, "Welcome home." "For real this time?" Rowan said, "For real." They went inside. In the morning the heralds rode out to every chapter of the pack, with 2 orders sealed in the king's hand. The first order named the heir. The second order named the queen. By the end of that week, in every hall of every chapter on the continent, the same announcement was read in the same flat voice by the same kind of herald, and every wolf in the pack heard the name Rowan Voss and the name Ren Voss for the first time, and most of them stood quietly while the names were read, because that was the thing you did when a name was put back where it belonged. In the kitchen wing of the palace, the head cook hung a sprig of dried river herb above the door of the lower hall and did not tell anybody what it meant. It meant she came back.